You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast, and this is episode 142. And today what we want to do is talk about two newer studies that came out on intermittent fasting. So we're going to talk today all about intermittent fasting because, really it's a question that we get asked a ton about. We are big fans of intermittent fasting. We use it in various programs in our clinic. And one of the things I guess we should stay right off the top is that intermittent fasting is not for everybody. And we're not saying it's a magic bullet. It's not going to fix a lot of everything. It's not a cure for everything. But we have seen how good intermittent fasting is for a lot of different conditions that we see in the clinic, including bad digestive issues and a whole bunch of stuff. So there are some definite advantages to intermittent fasting. Yep. I think the first thing we got to do really is, in case somebody's new to the idea of fasting, it sounds kind of scary a little bit, fasting, right? Because, we have this hunger mechanism and we're trained to eat. I'm like clockwork. Mom used to always laugh growing up because, I'd come in the house exactly at 12, exactly at 5. It's like you're just trained for that, right? So a lot of times we get hungry just because we're used to eating at a certain time. But the reality is intermittent fasting, there's really 3 ways that you can do it. So I guess we'll just start very simple, right? So there's something that's called an eating window. And that eating window is basically the amount of hours in a day that you're eating. Very straightforward, right? What's interesting is that with all these fitness tracking apps and food tracking apps, what they're finding out now is that as they're gathering kind of like this general data from all their users, what they're finding out, and there's been a couple studies that have looked at this, is that the average person has a very long eating window. Yeah. Most people they eat for more than 13 hours in a day. So,
and that doesn't mean constant eating, right? So we're not saying, look, you eat at 8 o'clock, you eat at 9 o'clock, you eat at 10 o'clock in the morning, 11. We're not saying that. But when you start eating at 8 o'clock in the morning and you finish at 8 o'clock at night, you've got, 12 hour?
Yeah, that's a 12. That's a 12 hour. Your eating window.
And it doesn't mean you ate every hour on the hour. It just means you started, and this is when you end.
Yeah,
in the day,
and
right?
A lot of people have roughly that 12-hour eating window. If they get up and they eat at 7:30 in the morning, they may have a snack. Their last snack might be at 7:30. But if they eat, let's just say they get up and they eat breakfast around 7 or 7:30, and then they have their last snack around 8:30 or 9, that's 13 hours in the day, in a sense, where they have an eating window for 13 hours, right? So if there's 24 hours in a day and somebody eats for 12 hours, well, then they're fasting for 12 hours, right? And 6 to 8 hours of that is happening overnight when you're sleeping. So as a rule of thumb, we don't spend a lot of time awake and not eating, right? I mean, most people, that's what they do. They get up, they eat breakfast, and they break their fast right away, and breakfast, break fast. They break their fast right away, and then they'll have a snack late at night. So, and that's what's happening for most people. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. However, when you are eating more than you're fasting and there's no balance in a lot of ways, it can create issues, right? And we've seen these issues. Yeah. Now, if somebody's eating 3 squares a day and they're not eating in between, and I mean, we can go on forever about all the variances and stuff like that. But the reality is people tend to do better when they start to shorten their eating window. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, there's a lot of ways that you can shorten your eating window, right? As you mentioned, the average person is about 13-hour eating window or a 12-hour eating window. Now, what happens if somebody shorted their eating window down to 10 hours, for example, right? So they eat breakfast at 8 and they eat their last meal at 6 o'clock at night. That's a 10-hour eating window. They're fasting for 14 hours in a sense, right? So it gives more digestive ability in a sense. They're able
less secretion of insulin.
Yeah, and that's some of the benefits that we're going to talk about with some of these new studies. But the idea of, so when we talk about fasting, we're talking about eating windows a lot of times, right? So the amount of hours you're fasting is one way of looking at it. Another way to look at it, and that's where it gets confusing because people they'll say, well, my eating window is 4 to 6 hours every day. which means that they're fasting for a lot longer than that, right? So that's kind of how we will talk about the concept of intermittent fasting. We'll talk about different eating windows in a sense. But there are a few ways that people fast nowadays, and then they've incorporated fasting into their everyday routine. So the big one, the more popular one, is this idea of intermittent fasting, right? And which basically means they're fasting intermittently, right? And people tend to do this every day or a couple times a week. And the most popular one is this 16-8. So they have an 8-hour eating window, right? So they'll eat for 8 hours, or they'll start and end their eating in an 8-hour window, and then they'll fast for 16 hours. And the most common way of doing that is people will skip breakfast. They'll break their fast around lunchtime. They'll have their last bite, last little snack at 8 o'clock at night, and then they fast again till the following lunchtime. And that's how a lot of people start fasting. Most people, they can do that. It doesn't take them long to do that. And a lot of people do that and they feel fantastic. They find in the morning they're more clear, and that's a very common way of fasting. Another very popular fast is the every other day fast, right? So basically, they'll eat normally one day. The next day, they won't fast completely, but they'll consume around 400 calories if they're a female, around 500 calories if they're a male. And that's that popular every other day fast, right? So they'll eat normally one day. The next day, if they're a guy, they'll eat around 500 calories. And if they're a girl, they'll eat around 400 calories. And then the following
that's sort
day,
of mimicking a fast, right?
It is. It's kind of mimics a fast in a sense. And, there's a lot of research again with that. And people lose a lot of weight doing that and they feel fantastic. That's the kind of the second way that people do fast. And then the third way that's common as well, and it's considered an intermittent fasting, is they actually fast for 24 hours straight. But if you plan it properly, you get to eat every day. So here's an example, and this is what a lot of people do. They'll have a meal at 6 o'clock at night. They'll fast till the following day at 6 o'clock at night. And they fasted for 24 hours, but they get to eat every day. Some people do that, and they'll do that once or twice a week, and they feel awesome. So those are the kind of the three fasts that we're talking about. Now, there are medical fasts. There are therapeutic fasts that are much longer, beyond 24 hours. They get into the 2-3 day fast. We're not talking about that on this episode. That's a therapeutic fast, and that's something that some people do. And there is research, again, if somebody gets diagnosed with cancer and they fast for 3 days, it kind of like refreshes the cells in a lot of ways. And there's different research for the length of fasting, right? And there's some great books and great resources out there. But what we're talking about today, on today's episode specifically, is intermittent fasting. So either 16-8. Now, a lot of people, they start off by fasting 16-8, and then what ends up happening, they end up shortening their eating window a little bit more, and they generally eat between 4 to 6 hours a day. So they'll break their fast around 2, and then they'll eat till around 6 or 8 at night, and depending on how they're doing, and they shorten their window even more. And again, a lot of people do awesome with that. They got great energy, their digestive system feels good, and that's what they do. So the idea with intermittent fasting, if you're going to do it, is to find that method that works. Some people prefer the every other day fast, where they just eat a little bit every other day. So really, that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about intermittent fasting. All three methods have their advantages. All three have great health benefits. You just have to find one that fits your lifestyle, right? Because of how we are in North America, we tend to eat suppers together. So that's why for a lot of people, it's easy to kind of skip breakfast, and they fast on that end. However, research has shown that if you're diabetic, you actually do better eating breakfast, eating lunch, eating an early supper, and then fasting to breakfast the next day. They do really well like that, more than skipping breakfast, right? So there's a lot of different ways of doing things. But at the end of the day, we're real big fans of intermittent fasting. And we tend to talk more about the 16-8 or the 12, not the 12 hours fasting, but they'll only eat for 4 to 6 hours or 8 hours a day. That's how most people that we know do it, and they do really well with it.
Yeah.
And how many times have we heard, oh, there's no way I can do that. I can't. There's no way. I was like that myself. I mean, there was no way that I can miss.
Because you were so built in because of hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, right, to eat frequently. And you stoked the fire quite a bit because you had a tendency to go into low blood sugar, right? You got that from your daddy, right?
And it's funny now. I have no problem going and lifting heavy weights fasted. I have no problem doing it.
Yeah,
I'll go. Generally, I kind of lift weights in the morning, and I won't eat, and I have no problem with it. I have good energy. I feel good. My mind's clear. It's amazing what happens as you start getting into that routine, how much easier it is and how good you feel. But again, it's not for everybody. Some people, they just don't feel good doing it. And that's why we don't recommend it for everybody. It's one of those things, you try it. If it works well for you, that's awesome. We know a lot of people that have lost a lot of weight when they started to incorporate intermittent fasting. Now,
I had a guy in this morning just to tell you a story about intermittent fasting. Again, the advantages of it for him. And he was a diabetic. So diagnosed as diabetic. I scared the living skinny out of him because I had talked to him about how diabetes ends bad. And he'd already had been a fully fledged diabetic, taking insulin, taking metformin, taking all the medications, and going downhill rapidly. And he did it, and then not only did he lower his blood sugar, he went very low carbohydrate and really changed his diet. And then he started to implement the intermittent fasting. And I said, well, try it. Just see how you feel with it. Just see if you're able to do it. But his sugars were in so much control, and because he had really cut out his carbohydrates, and he just found that now he was in such control that he found that he even got better advantages, even as a diabetic, with intermittent fasting. And he just never has breakfast in the morning. For him, it was all right.
Yeah, he felt
even
good.
Though he was diabetic, but he had really reversed his diabetes because of his diet, right?
Well, and that's the thing that's important to understand, is that it's not just shortening your eating window. This is kind of a problem that a lot of people have, or a misconception. They think if I just simply shorten my eating window, I'm going to automatically lose weight and feel better. But even if you have a 4-hour eating window and you're eating nothing but crappy carbs, it's not going to help. I mean, sure, you're going to spend a lot of time not eating, which is always a good thing if you're eating crappy carbs a lot. But it's not a magic bullet. If you combine intermittent fasting with cutting out crappy carbs, that's when the real health benefits start to kick in. That's when people start to feel
well, you can't
so much
out-exercise a bad diet. You can't out-fast a bad diet. You can't outdo any bad diet, right? I don't care. There's no tricks. Some people talk to me. I had an email. I think yesterday was an email or a text. No, it was an email. Somebody asking me about a magic pill. It's out in the United States. Lose 50 pounds and everything's going to be good and you're going to be skinny overnight. And, I just said, well, look, if it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true. I said, there is nothing that's going to outdo you changing your diet. I mean, you don't get to eat what you feel like and lose weight. It just don't happen.
No, and unfortunately, okay, now if you're thinking this intermittent fasting sounds fascinating, or people that are on it, that have tried it, and you've seen that they're getting some good results on it, and you're not sure where to start, well, the first thing you have to do is you have to pick your eating window. You have to say, all right, am I going to do this? Am I going to fast every day? Or am I going to fast a few days a week? Am I going to eat every other day? Am I going to do 24-hour fast? Yeah. So you got to kind of find that window.
And some people at work, and just to give you a little example, again, we get so much feedback on this, that a lot of people do it during the week because they're going to work anyways, and they say, instead of me having a snack at 10 o'clock, because a lot of people wait till they get to work and then eat. I say, well, if I just have a coffee then, have a coffee when I first get up, and then I have another coffee at the break, and I'm not eating. They find it can go till noon, and they say, you know what, I've incorporating this during the work week, and then I don't do it on the weekends. And they find it just part of the routine, and they feel good, and again, so it's just little tricks to, whatever works, like you say, for you as an individual, and, you might experiment a little bit.
And now let's talk about a few of the benefits here that we see in our clinic and that we hear from people that write back to us. And I guess even before that, let's talk about a couple of studies that have just come out in the last little bit. There was a study done on an 8-hour eating window. All right. So it's the traditional 8-16 format that a lot of people do. This is by far the most common type of fast, is the 8-hour eating window. And as I mentioned, most people will eat lunch and then they'll have their last little snack at 8 o'clock at night, and then they just rinse and repeat. What they found is that this study found that people generally did lose weight. It wasn't statistical significance because, again, you'd have to look at what they're actually eating. However, what they found, and this is what is key for what we deal with all the time, is they found that their fasting insulin dropped from 10.3 to 5.7.
Wow.
So that's a significant drop in fasting insulin. And fasting insulin is a great indicator of insulin resistance.
High circulating insulin.
High circulating insulin. And that's where go back and listen to episode 100 when we talk about all the three things found in every disease. We talk a lot about high circulating insulin. And we've talked a lot about insulin over the years. But simply by shortening their eating window, they lowered their fasting insulin. So if you have insulin resistant symptoms, this is a tool you may want to try, right? If you're wondering what insulin resistant symptoms are, we could give you a few, but if you come to our website, we have a ton of stuff on all the different symptoms because a study came out a couple of years ago, and I think I'm going to guess here, but I think this is right, that people associate being overweight with insulin resistance. So everybody who's overweight has insulin resistance, but this study found that it only predicted 18% of people with insulin resistance. So obesity is not a great indicator of insulin resistance. Some people that are insulin resistant become obese. They become overweight. Some people that are insulin resistant, they don't become overweight.
They're skinny.
They're skinny. So their symptoms are going to be different, right? Their symptoms, they're going to have fatigue or they're going to have low energy, but they may have joint pain or they may have high blood pressure or they may have high triglycerides or they may. So the symptoms of high circulating insulin.
Uric acid.
Exactly, high uric acid. So
they form kidney stones.
You can't just say to yourself, well, I'm not overweight, therefore I'm not insulin resistant. It doesn't work that way. Weight is not a great indicator on its own for insulin resistance. If you're struggling with insulin resistance, like if you're listening, you have high blood pressure, you have insulin resistance. There's no question. Mm-hmm. This may be a tool. Well, this would definitely be a tool that I would try, right, to kind of lower your insulin. If you shorten your eating window and you combine that with lowering your carbohydrate intake, that is a powerful 1-2 punch. There's no question that is very effective. And we've seen it over and over again so many times, right? So that's the first thing. We really like what time-restricted feeding does for insulin, and which is the primary reason why we recommend it to people, because it's a easy-ish. Once you start, it's not hard. If you know somebody who is doing intermittent fasting, go ask them how hard it is now, and they'll tell you it's not hard. It really isn't. It becomes one of those things that it's not difficult after a while. At first, it's like, there's no way I can do it. But here's the thing. We tell this to people all the time. It's like, well, I can't go to 12. Okay, can you go to 10 o'clock in the morning? Yes, okay. Can you eventually go to 10:30? Yes. Can you? You don't have to do it overnight. You don't have to go cold turkey if you can. You can kind of ease yourself into shortening your eating window down. But the reality is this. Research is showing pretty consistently that it will help control your insulin. It will help lower your insulin. And remember, you and I have talked about this many times. Type 2 diabetes is a disease of insulin resistance. It's not a disease of high blood sugar. High blood sugar levels are a symptom of type 2 diabetes, not the cause. Type 2 diabetes is a disease of high circulating insulin, right? Yeah. So
is hypoglycemia.
So is hypoglycemia, exactly.
Low blood sugar.
And that's the thing that people have a hard time understanding. So that's the first thing. That was the first study specifically related to high circulating insulin. And again, some people are overweight because they have high insulin. So if you can lower your insulin and kind of fix that insulin resistance, it'll make losing weight a little bit easier, because losing weight's never easy. It's not, it's never an easy thing for people to lose weight.
Especially women, right?
Yeah, they have so many, as you mentioned, so many different hormones kind of working against their weight loss all the time. And here's another study on intermittent fasting that I find fascinating. Now, you and I have talked a lot over the years about the microbiome, right? It's a collection of bacteria that kind of lives in your body that plays so many significant roles in your health.
Yeah. Mostly in your gut.
Mostly
everywhere, but mostly in your gut.
And researchers are starting to look at your microbiome as another organ. That's how vital it is. If your microbiome isn't healthy, you're not healthy. If your microbiome isn't healthy, not only is your digestive system probably not working the way it should, but you're at a much higher risk for brain issues such as Alzheimer's, dementia, autoimmune big time, right? All those autoimmune conditions. So they are, microbiome is key to being healthy. And you and I have talked a lot about microbiome in the past, but what another study had found, it was a small study, but what they found was that intermittent fasting actually increased the diversity of gut bacteria. So it actually helped your gut bacteria. You think, how in the world can not eating increase the gut bacteria diversity, right? Which goes to show you there's kind of a regeneration that takes place when you're intermittent fasting.
Think, folks, of your microbiome just for a minute. Think of it as an ecosystem, right? Like everybody's got a sort of an individual thing, but it's like a jungle, right? And there's all sorts of different types of bacteria in your body. And, you don't want you take out one section of it and it affects everything, right? So you take an antibiotic again, and the importance of bacteria is unbelievable. Like we're just on it big time.
And they're just starting to scratch the surface and research on the importance of it. But it actually increases the diversity of your... It also, and other studies have shown this as well, it reduces inflammation. So intermittent fasting reduces inflammation. And again, you and I have talked about this so many times that inflammation is kind of a stepping stone to all disease. The key is figuring out what causes the inflammation because, like as we've said, inflammation doesn't just magically appear. However, inflammation, if you got pain, you got inflammation. You've got a brain issue, you've got neuroinflammation. You've got, anything, it doesn't matter what disease you have or what condition you have, inflammation is there, right? And in order to, you can't fix your condition unless you get rid of that inflammation and fix the cause of that inflammation. But here you go. Intermittent fasting reduces inflammation. Again, it makes sense. High insulin is highly inflammatory. It helps reduce inflammation. When you got bad gut bacteria, again, that creates a lot of inflammation, right? So again, it reduces inflammation. And this other study kind of talked a little bit about the effect it had specifically on MS in the animal model. So they actually studied in animals. They found that it actually reduced demyelination, which is huge when it comes to MS. And it did a couple other things as well to protect the cells. So there's some really good...
So significant.
Yeah. It's one of those things that it's a tool. Intermittent fasting is a tool. And if you haven't tried it, try it. See how you feel when you're doing that, right? And a lot of people use intermittent fasting as kind of a thing. Like they go away on a weekend and they ate too much, so then they start to fast the next day. And it's kind of like... It makes sense in a lot of ways, right? You feast, you famine. It's just this natural kind of balance that takes place. If you're going to overeat tonight, kind of fast your way there. It's just kind of one of these not easy kind of things.
And fast afterwards.
Yeah, it's an easy thing that people can do to kind of control their eating in a lot of ways. So kind of summarize, we're big fans of intermittent fasting. If you haven't tried it, we would suggest trying it. Find a method. Just try to shorten your eating window a little bit. Because another study that we talk about in our programs showed that if somebody has a 13-hour eating window and they're female, it increases their chances of cancer coming back, right? So there seems to be something that happens when you shorten your eating window. I don't think personally that we do well when we eat for more hours than we don't eat, right? So if you're eating for 13 hours in a day and you're fasting for 11, it seems like it's setting you up for failure. And it's not one of those things that's going to affect you right away. But if you got a digestive issue and you're eating for more hours in a day, you got to let rest and digest take place, right? Which is why one of the tools that we use to help with digestive issues is finding a good eating window for them that helps them out.
And because you're and just in the mechanism of insulin, just to refresh folks for why we talk about these eating windows and that, because people sometimes confuse eating with blood sugar. So if you eat at 8 o'clock in the morning, obviously insulin, your blood sugar is going to go up, and then your blood sugar is going to go down. The problem with insulin is that when you eat at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 10 o'clock in the morning, your insulin is still being secreted because its job is not only to elevate your blood sugar and to bring it down, it also has to store energy, right? Its biggest job is taking sugar that you produce from food
Yeah, and making glycogen.
And make it glycogen. Get it out, get it out, get it out. We always talk about you cannot have sugar in your bloodstream. Your body does everything in the universe to get it out. That's insulin's job. So it goes way past when you're eating. So people say, "Well, doc, I'm eating good." Yeah, but if you're eating frequently, and even if you're eating good, and we love eating good. Yeah, doc, I'm eating low carb. But you're still secreting too much insulin when you're eating too frequently, because insulin's job goes way past you putting food in your mouth.
And insulin's a food hormone, so it's present when you're eating.
Yeah.
And when you're not eating, insulin isn't present, right? So again, there are so many different reasons why we like intermittent fasting. And these are just a couple of more studies that kind of just reinforce why we like intermittent fasting and why it's one of the tools, definitely not the only tool, and we don't recommend it for everybody, but it's one of the tools that we like in helping to control insulin and helping also to, it's an approach that we use to help fix some conditions, right? So we're big fans of it. So again, we want to thank you for joining us on today's episode. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@martinclinic.com. Also, if you're not a newsletter subscriber, go to our website, martinclinic.com, and sign up. We email a few times a week. You know, we're huge believers in giving as much health information as possible, and we do that a few times a week. We do email a lot, but we got a lot of health information to share with people, and if a study comes out that catches our attention, we're definitely going to write about it and try to draw some practical things that you can use right away. So if you're not a newsletter subscriber, head to our website and do that. Every Thursday morning, you do a Facebook Live, so you can join you every Thursday morning and ask questions, and you're out there for 30 minutes or so, 40 minutes, answering a ton of questions. So it's a great way for that as well. Again, we want to thank you for joining us and have a great day.